Welcome, everyone, to the Contact Center Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. Today, we've got a really exciting guest with Christian Hörnebrant. And Christian, you are the customer experience manager for all of Telia. And for anyone who doesn't know Telia, it's the largest communications provider like the Verizon of the United States. And you handle all of their customer experience. We're also going to talk based on some of your past experience. And you've been deeply involved with sales for a number of years. You've actually been accused of having constant ideas, a trail of always ideating and innovating. And so what I'd love to do is I'd love to have you maybe just explain a little bit more about your background before we get into the topic today, which is like essential insights for what you call the contact center nudging strategy, which obviously none of us have ever heard of before. But when I heard of it, we wanted to have it on the podcast. So we're going to get into that really quickly. But if you could explain a little bit more about your background, that would be great.
Thanks, Steve. That's a great intro. It might be a bit of an overstatement that I'm the sole person responsible for a multi-billion-dollar company's customer experience. So let's just call that a grand compliment. I'm involved in it, but I wouldn't be able to take credit for it. But my background is I've always loved sales, and I started as a tech geek working while I was doing the equivalent of high school. I just spent all my days in the computer room learning stuff and handling stuff. And then it's always turned into sales. Whatever I did, it turned into sales. And I just loved the aspects of it where you're learning something, you're chasing something. And it's also because I'm this very open person nowadays. And it hasn't always been like that. As a young teenager, I had every insecurity that you would have, as probably most people, concerned about what people think about me and how should I look, what should I do, what should I say, should I talk now, should I be silent now, and everything that you can imagine. And then it's been a process of working with myself as well and just trying to learn. I think I was in my 20s when I finally understood that if you don't care so much, life gets so much simpler. I've fallen off a stage in Oslo, in Norway. I could either mope about it or run away from it, or I could just stand up and say, that wasn't unexpected, let's continue. That's also led me to one of my great powers in life. I dare to state my ideas. So if we're doing something, I would always have 10 ideas about anything. But I don't know what's brilliant or not. And I don't think anyone knows if your own idea is brilliant or not, unless you vent it. And if you censor yourself, the brilliant idea is most likely something that you would censor. So you need to be able to speak them, get the reactions, and 4 of the ideas will be utterly, completely stupid. The worst ideas you've ever heard of. But if you don't speak them, no one's going to know. And you won't even know. And you will find that 1 or 2 nuggets that's pure gold that you can tweak about it and work on. And that's what I try to bring in any project that I'm working in, just narrating what I see, what I think, what I reflect. And then together we'll work on that and make it into something.
So now I'm really intrigued because I'm sure this nudging strategy is one of the ones that wasn't stupid. Perfect segue. Love to have you define what is in the notion of customer experience, and specifically in a contact center. What is a nudging strategy? What does that mean?
Think of it like this. If you have kids and you want them to do a chore, if you tell them, hey, do this now or I'll something, you're just going to hit a brick wall of resistance and it's going to be fighting. And as soon as you command something or demand something or order something, if you're in the army, then you've trained it for 2 years that you've got to do it right now. If you don't do it, as we said, in this second, someone's going to die. Obviously, there are cases where you need strict orders. But usually, most of the time, you need to transform something and get something somewhere, and you can't do the giant leap in one go. I can do an example. We worked on a case with a large bank in Sweden, and people were having pension insurances where you're locking your money away from age 20 until you're 65. and you're combining pension and insurance and old age into one package. So it's probably the most boring thing a person can think of, besides going maybe to the dentist or something. And the bank wanted all of their customers to do a change. And they had tried for 2 or 3 years trying to make people do this change. They wouldn't listen, they wouldn't hear it, they would forget about it. And then they came to an agency that I was working on at that time. So we thought, if we're going to have them do this, we need to rethink this. And this was maybe 15 years ago. So you needed to sign a physical paper and mail it in. So how can you get 100,000 people to sign a form that they don't understand, they don't want to do, have no interest, and if they can, they're just going to push it. So we had to create some kind of nudging strategy for this. So we just segmented it into maybe 15 small steps, where we just slowly move the customer towards the desired result. And it started a kind of classic. They get an email informing them about something. And in the email, it said, we will send you a postal mail in the coming week. Please look at it when you get it. The day it was sent out, they got a text message. We finally sent you the postal message. Go find it. 2 days after it was supposed to have arrived, we called them. Hey, this is us from the bank. We just want to make sure that you've gotten our postal message. Could you put it on your kitchen table? What time is a good time for me to call you? Okay, Thursday at 2:00. I'll hold you to that, Steve. Perfect. And then they got an email confirmation saying that we have a meeting. You got a text message. In 2 hours' time, it's your meeting. Then you call them again. And we probably, half of them had already lost their papers. So we had to resend a new paper, a new document, etc. And all of this time, we had to explain the benefits of the choice, because they had to make a choice. Small baby steps, pushing them slightly further until they were at the position to make a choice.
I love how you said the baby steps, because that's exactly what I was thinking of. But then you combine that with those individual small steps, they were also opportunities to reinforce the benefits of why they were even doing this. Because if I don't know why, and I've never had to do it before, and it sounds complex, I'm going to push it down the road continually. So you just gave them a reason to only have to do a little bit at a time. And every time they did it, they had a reinforcement of why that little thing they were doing was actually a big, important thing. So now we get the nudging strategy. Tell me, how does this nudging strategy come into the world of customer experience, customer support, contact centers? And like even down to what an agent can be doing.
One crucial thing is to build familiarity and awareness. So we did a big test a year back when you had linear TVs. Maybe it was last millennia, I'm not really sure anymore. But the idea still here is, if you run a TV ad and on your website, if the contents don't match, then you lose track of it. And also when you're then engaging with the customer services somehow, it's got to stick there as well. If we could do it in 1998 with the technology that existed back then, we had a TV ad with some person who was the spotlight hero of that ad. And then we had another person on the website when they came to the website. Or if we changed the website to the person that actually was the hero, there was a kind of a 15% increase in conversions. And if you incorporated that also into the contact center world, while you're waiting on the queue, you get a message from this person saying, "Oh, great that you're calling us. We'll be with you shortly." So everything you could do to reinforce that it was the same context.
Yes.
And now if you work in the age of hyper-personalization, there's really no excuse for not starting to implement this. But it's a pinball game now. Before it was a linear motion. Now it's a chaotic quantum pinball game in 5 dimensions. It's become increasingly hard. But if you can work this out, so you can find all of these little components, and you need platforms, of course, for this, and etc. So it's a big undertaking. But if you get it right, you're going to see a massive improvement in customer satisfaction and conversions, because you're giving people what they want and when they want it.
Do you have a story and an example of how this came to life, because you're leading us along, you're nudging us along, by the way. But we remember things 22 times more when we hear it in the form of a story. Like, how do you tell us a story about how you put this, maybe a Telia or wherever, into action and what happened?
Every story starts with the why. So you need to find first a root cause why excursion, the 5 whys or whatever method you want to use to figure out what's in it. If I'm trying to pitch you a new watch, so why would you need a new watch? To figure out what the time is. Okay, that's not very sexy at all. So why do you need to figure out what the time is? So I know when to start my journey home. Okay, so why do you need to know when you want to start your journey home? Because if I'm not home in time, my wife's going to get angry. Okay, so why don't you want your wife to get angry? Because I don't want to sleep on the couch or whatever. It's that if you do the 5 whys along the way until you figure out the real reason behind it. So you need the watch because you want to have a happy marriage. And then I have the starting grounds for my why. And then I can start building up the story around that. And then we tap into emotions. Do you remember when you were just falling in love and life was great and there was no kids yanking your clothing and saying daddy or whatever? And then you build that story up. You get some familiarity, you get some rapport. Then you come to the twist where it kind of leads the way to how things aren't in that way. And then you come back to it. And then you end on, if you just had this watch it roll all this line. So if you can find that story and adapt that to your business needs or your business processes, or to get your son doing his homework or whatever, that would be my perfect or the easiest way to explain this.
So that makes perfect sense. Now I'm going to ask how, in a business model, it gets applied. So for like at Telia, you have large organizations and an ABM marketing model, sales model that you're following. You have individual customers that you're marketing to and you're nudging. So does the nudging strategy work at both ends of those spectrum?
It does. You don't always call it the nudging strategy, as we said before. Most of us are doing it in everyday life without thinking about it. You won't get someone make a life-changing choice or a small choice, just deciding what to eat for dinner or deciding what the TV package or what the phone package, how many gigabytes of surf do I need? You always have to find the essence and the need. And a great way of doing that is just staying curious and trying to listen in. So if you turn it into a contact center world, if you train your agents to actually listen to the customer, ask a few questions to the customer to have the customer clarify the need and the whys behind that need, then you find out exactly how to take care of that customer, how to help that customer and get them what they actually need. And if you're in it for the long term, you will give your customer what they need and not maybe what's best for your 2-week profit.
Makes perfect sense. And to the point where I want to break down your strategy a little bit. And you have actually 5 core elements that you say are elements of kind of leadership and this nudging strategy. Take us through these elements and why they're important.
We train managers, we train staff, and the first thing you need to develop is some kind of self-awareness. We usually always start with a self-awareness approach where you need to reflect on yourself. You need to be able to ask yourself, and why did something happen? How did I react when it happened? So we do lots of training with feedback, and you could argue that why would you spend time digging into people's values, their purpose in life, how to address feedback if you're just the contact center staff? But really, in essence, they are one of the most important branches of your organization, because that's where mostly you can prevent bad experiences. It's not always about giving great experiences. As soon as a person turns to the contact center, there's usually an issue. So you have a great outcome if you prevent the bad experience. That's a huge positive, and you need to remember that. So in order to facilitate that, one thing that you could do then is have each staff be able to be comfortable and safe within themselves. So if you understand, there's lots of studies to be done. So if you understand the company's values, or if you understand your own values, what gives the biggest boost? It's actually understanding your own values, because that makes you feel safe as a person. It makes you feel anchored and grounded. And that also means that you can handle a conversation without it becoming about you, because it's about the situation. It's about the customer. It's about how we interpret the situation, how we lived in a situation. It's not about you're a bad person, Steve, and I hate you. It's about, in this situation, in this context, I said something that you interpreted as something which made me respond to that. And that has nothing to do with you or me. It's just the situation. So if our contact center staff can come to that realization, it's usually hard because they're mostly 18 to 25-year-old people. So in the beginning of their life journey. So that's why you need to work on that. And you need to give them the opportunity. You need to empower them so they can succeed. So if we then go back to what you started with, we first have an envisioning part, one of the 4 E's. So first you need to envision. And as we said before, if I don't understand why I should do something, I'm not going to do it, because I'm just going to think it doesn't matter or whatever. We have this example saying that you're a stonemason on the 12th century, and I come to you and say, Steve, I need 100 white bricks that's 12 by 12 big. And you say, fine. And you gave me 99 and a half bricks that was kind of 10 to 12-ish, and you're happy with your results because you didn't expect much, you didn't understand the context. But if I instead said, hey, Steve, we're building up this new school building here, and we want it to look really good, and we want them for our community, it's for our students, it's for our kids. So in order for us to build it, we need 100 really square bits of this white marble stone slabs, and they need to be 12 by 12 in order to fit. The effort that you're going to make and the precision that you're going to will vary greatly between these two steps.
I love that. So you're giving the context is what you're doing. You've done a lot of analogies with your kids, and I have 4 teenagers, and I know that it really helps to explain why is it so important to have your chore done on time, not just, oh, it's another nagging thing I got to do. If you give context, there's greater understanding, and also a little explanation of the benefits of it for them as well. I love this. Here's what I want to ask, because we've covered quite a bit, but I want to make sure you have the opportunity for me to ask you, what haven't we covered? What's important about this nudging strategy that we're talking about here that we haven't talked about yet?
Let's just break it down. The first thing is you have to be curious. I think we spoke about it, but I want to just reiterate this. So if you're not curious and you don't follow up and you don't learn in every step, because life is not a strategy for yourself as well.
Right.
You have to be curious and you have to ask things and you have to want to understand people. It's not enough to, if you're in a meeting, you don't just wait your turn to speak, because then you're not listening. You have to listen actively and understand what you're trying to communicate and read into. That's the only way for you to understand, where is my opposing party at? So if I'm going to nudge you somewhere, there's maybe a line of 50 steps, or it's a branch of trees with infinite amounts of variables. And if I started in the wrong position, I'm always going to fail, because I haven't met you where you're at. And then it's also about the storytelling, as we spoke about, but it's also at least the illusion of safety. Even if it's not perfectly safe, or even if it's not crystal clear, at least you need to have the illusion or the feeling of safety. Illusion is at least having the feeling of safety. Then you can dare to venture a bit outside your comfort zone. So we need to have the element of safety in order to prevent retaliation or having your personal guards up. So that means also that when you have that, then you also have to back off and allow the space. I've understood where you're going, where you're at. I've tried to make you understand where we are going, why this is important. We've used storytelling to paint the new perfect world. Where would we get to if we can do all of this? And with that said, you also need to decide, should this person know the final outcome or not? That also depends on where you're going and what you're doing. And then when you've done that, you transfer the ownership back to the other party, and you back away a bit and allow them to try it and to grow. And if they're doing something great, you can encourage that and push them a bit higher along this so that you can help people win. Everyone needs a win. If you're building trust, if you're working with a big organization, I usually work with big companies, that when you always have to have a quick win in order to gain trust so that it's working.
Yeah.
Let's have them try the next step and the next phase. And also when it comes down to the execution of everything, you need to set the priorities straight, because you will never, ever in life have time to do everything that you want to do. So you just need to decide what's most important, what can and can't I do. And then all barriers are only imaginary illusions, because the barrier doesn't exist if you're really dead set on getting it done. It's just a temporary hindrance that's in the way of your path. There's always around through it, over it. If you were ever to listen to a Swedish song, you would listen to Mora Träsk, when they have a song where they're going about, it's probably a version in English as well. We can't go through it, we have to go over it. We can't go over it, we have to go under it. We can't go around it, we have to go, and etc. Just continues and continues. There's probably an English version somewhere on that concept. So that would be, I think, the 6th time that I've tried to summarize this.
So I have a very practical question for you. Obviously, we're all buying into that the more that you can listen, the more that you can understand, the more you can meet somebody where they're at, you can explain the benefits, create the context. This sounds like it takes a lot of time. And like at a very practical level, in a contact center where you're trying to minimize costs and you're tracking average handle times. But this sounds like you're wanting us to spend more time. And there is a very large trend to deprioritize things like average handle times and focus more on spending time and creating, maybe it's not first time resolution. Maybe you're not going to be able to handle it the very first time. So how does this play into the typical metrics of how we're judged in a contact center?
First of all, you get the outcomes based on what you measure. And we've tried lots of things. Honestly, the worst thing you can measure and track agents on is average handling time, because what you're getting then is a person trying to finish the conversation as quickly as possible and moving on to the next one. So the most underwhelming and underperforming era of the customer service that we had was when we were tracking average handling time, because no agent wanted to take the time to answer anything, they just wanted to move on. So it's much, much better to track the resolution rate and the return callers. And it's also really good to route conversations back to the original lead. If you couldn't solve it in the first go, for whatever reason, you're going to get it back. So take your time, help the customer, make whatever they need to get done, and solve it. And if you can't solve it, then it's not the customer's problem to own it. Then you, as the contact center organization, would own the issue. Then you can escalate it 55 times internally in your own organization if you would like to. But the contact center organization that owns the issue and owns the task of getting back to the customer. And that takes time, but it's time that is well invested. We've done all the metrics you can think about this. If you're talking about lifetime value for a customer, if you're talking about quarterly profits as a public listed stock company, maybe not. Right. But if you're talking about lifetime value that you should be focusing on, then it's worth every second.
Well said. Well said. That was almost like a trick question. Like the average handle times and things like that. There's really, in today's modern era, how we're looking at this, if we believe at all that we're not a cost center, we're a value center, then we can't track things like that and put that up as the most important metric.
With that said, it's also about, if you're having 2,000 agents and 2 million contacts a year, 2 more seconds per contact, it costs money. So that's why you always, as you're into the value side of it, what you're getting here that you should never forget, and this is probably something that we didn't cover, that I forgot that we should cover, that's because it's important. If you're having 2 million conversations, at say enormous amount of insights that you can get from this. So every interaction has a value regardless of the outcome because you've learned something. The question is, how can you transfer that knowledge from 2,000 contact center agents into the organization?
It's a good thing we needed it. Glad you brought it up because it's really super important, because contact centers aren't cost centers, they're value centers. And there's value for every single department inside of the company. So I'm really glad you brought that up. What I want to do is I want to give an opportunity, because I know people are going to have questions. So would it be appropriate that we gave a link out to your profile on LinkedIn if people have questions for you? Yes, Christian, thank you so much for coming on and helping us break down. We've talked to so many executives in the CX space and the contact center space, and nobody has ever really talked about how do we take those baby steps and how do we really think through them and train our agents to be able to identify them and listen for them and use that as a part of the strategy to resolve their problems. So, or cross-sell and upsell. So thank you for expanding our minds on that. We don't want to talk about the ideas that were stupid, but that was a good one. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve. It was a great honor to be here and have a great time with you. It's been fun. And usually when you have fun, good things happen.
Fantastic.